Hello fellow aspirants, this is me Dr. Jagdish Jagtap, and in today's podcast we'll be discussing NATO, that is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. This is some information about me. Immediately after the Second World War, there was a serious fear among the Western European nations of the USSR and the spread of communism. So these guys were really scared. These include France, UK. First of all, they were very much weakened by the World War, and now they were facing the threat of this huge superpower next door, that is USSR. So they got along at Brussels in 1948 and they signed this Treaty of Brussels. And they said that today we'll stand united and we'll counter USSR. So these countries were France, UK, Luxembourg, Belgium and Netherlands. After this, the USSR captured Czechoslovakia and it imposed the Berlin blockade. Like the Berlin was cut off from the rest of Germany. So now these countries got really scared. And that is when the NATO was formed under US leadership in 1949 in Washington. And there's an interesting article in NATO's, that is Article 5. It says that an attack on one is an attack on all. So if suppose someday USSR happened to attack UK, then that would be taken as an attack on all of NATO and they would respond in full force. This article has been used time and again, and one interesting fact is that even in India, when India wanted to capture Goa in 1960s, the Portugal government threatened to use this article. Then definitely the USSR will not keep quiet. So even they had the Warsaw Pact in 1955, where they took along a bunch of East European countries. Now this NATO has faced a lot of criticism. The first important criticism is that it intensified the Cold War. We can see that first the NATO was formed, then the Warsaw Pact was formed. So a huge arms race began here. Secondly, it undermined the United Nations Security Council because this UNSC was formed precisely for maintaining security, and now NATO had taken the job on itself. And one of the members of NATO, that is France, was really pissed for some time, and they wanted equality in that NATO, so they pushed off all NATO soldiers from their soil and stopped installation of all missiles. So there were some hiccups in NATO also. Many times NATO has taken unilateral actions, as we have seen in Afghanistan, Iraq. But they have some achievements to their credit also. First is that they formed a bulwark against communist expansion. Now this is important because had NATO not been there, the USSR would have advanced communism in one country after the another, and this might have resulted into US and Soviet Union war. So that was prevented by this effective organization. To some extent it forged unity in Europe because since it was a military alliance, these countries which were part of this were very close to each other, and that is how an extent of unity was forged. Though Yugoslavia was not a NATO member, NATO extended protection to Yugoslavia. It secured oil supply to Europe from Suez Canal. So there was a Suez crisis in which France and UK behaved very irresponsibly and they unilaterally took possession of Suez Canal. But the NATO made sure that this France and UK gave up this adventure. Later on in 1950s, Greece, Italy, Turkey also expanded, joined the NATO and NATO expanded. There was this incident in 1962 called as the U2 incident. What happened was a spy plane ventured into Soviet territory and it was shot down, and the relations between Soviet Union and USA or NATO became very tense, and there was like a scare of war. Further, it was intensified by the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, where the Soviet Union had positioned nuclear ballistic missiles near USA in Cuba, and that was a huge big crisis, diplomatic crisis, and there was a real scare of nuclear war. After the dissolution of the Soviet Union, many erstwhile Soviet Union states or satellite states joined NATO. So this has really scared Putin, and he fears that Russia is being encircled. In Bosnia-Herzegovina crisis in 1993, NATO played a very effective role in declaring a no-fly zone over this area, and in a way it helped to resolve that war. Even in Kosovo conflict, it had a major role, and it prevented a few further escalation of the war and killing of the Croats by the Serbs. And a most famous example we know is of 9/11. In 2001, USA was attacked, and this is where USA invoked Article 5, and the whole NATO joined in this war against terrorism, and they had invaded Afghanistan. As a piece of GK, we have to know that at present there are 28 states in NATO, and their headquarters is in Brussels. Now there is one more thing we have to know, that is the Truman Doctrine. Now after the Second World War, this fellow Harry Truman, the president of USA, he declared a 4-point Truman Doctrine. The first point was that US is committed to UN. Now it might seem as a joke today because most of the times US has flouted UN, but he declared that USA would stay committed to the effectiveness of United Nations. Secondly, they wanted that nations which have been affected by World War II should be assisted in economic recovery by USA. And thirdly, they wanted to take steps to prevent spread of communism, that is the dominance of Soviet Union. And finally, they decided that under this doctrine they'll give technical assistance to developing countries, which include India. Now we have to understand that this doctrine had at its base stopping spread of communism, because had they not given technical assistance to developing countries, they might have switched their sides to Soviet Union, because whoever give help, these countries will go to them. So the goal of all these 4 points was stopping Soviet communism. In line with this, they came up with the Marshall Plan. So this was Europe specific. From USA, they sent lots of help to Europe, and this help was in the tune of $13 billion in 4 years. So that's a huge amount of money, and they did send this for the reconstruction of Europe. And as expected, Soviet Union was really pissed at this. Thanks a lot. I hope this was helpful. If you have any comments or queries, do write them. I'll reply as soon as possible. Thank you. Have an awesome day.